千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Laozi. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for the sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let us continue with Tao Te Ching, chapter 15. As we discussed previously, this is the not overfilled chapter, where the term not overfilled means not being full of oneself, constantly maintaining a humble attitude. Specifically, this chapter talks about the ancient Tao masters, those who came centuries before Laozi, and how they attained the Tao at a high level while remaining humble. The idea is that we should all learn from their example. Here is how the chapter looks. It is longer than usual, 19 lines. We were able to divide this up into multiple sections. Specifically, the 4 sections, as you can see. Last time, we went through the first section, which talked about how Laozi could see the wonders of the ancient masters, but it was not so clear how they were able to attain the wonders. In the second section, from line 6 to line 12, Laozi talks about what he was able to observe of the ancient masters. There are 7 major characteristics that they had in common, and this will be our focus area today. So our plan is to recap section 1 and then go into section 2 at line 6. In section 1, we started out with this idea about the Tao masters of antiquity. For those of you who have tuned in to the previous chapter, we are on chapter 15 now. The previous one was Tao Te Ching 14. So right before this one, at the very end of it, Laozi talked about the Tao of the ancients. He talked about how he would use this ancient Tao to manage his life. He said, use the Tao of the ancients to manage the existence of today. Now, of course, today for him is 2,500 years ago for us. So he was talking about the ancients who were well before that. So this chapter is picking up on that very thought in order to continue it, to provide additional details on these ancient masters that Laozi respected. Who were they? How did they approach life? And how did they interact with people. Now, the other major point that we talked about last time was the subtle wonders that the ancient masters were able to accomplish. As I mentioned previously, Laozi had particular expertise about these ancient masters, and this was because of his position as the royal archivist, serving one of the kings during the Warring States period of ancient China. As the royal archivist, Laozi had access to many more ancient scrolls than just about anyone else during his time. From his studies, he could see how spiritually advanced these masters were, the masters that came before him. And his reverence, his respect were reflected in many chapters from the Tao Te Ching. We then talked about how the depths of these ancient masters were such that they could not be easily seen through or discerned. The scrolls that Laozi had access to were essentially compilations of knowledge and wisdom. Among them were the I Ching, which by his time already had a history well over 2,000 years. There was also classics on traditional Chinese medicine from Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor. And the Yellow Emperor is seen as one of the early founding originators of the Tao. And before Huangdi was Emperor Fuxi. So Fuxi was the true origin of all this. And this is all the more credible because he was also attributed as the originator of the I Ching, the Book of Changes. So these classics, in the form of scrolls that Laozi had in the royal archives, they documented the results, but they did not delve into how the ancient masters derived the results, how they arrived at their conclusions, nor did they talk about the thought process of the ancient masters. Not just Emperor Huangdi or Fuxi, but all the refined sages and Tao cultivators of previous generations. And because it's been centuries of tradition, already by the time of Laozi, there were many generations of these Tao cultivators and sages. This is the reason why, when the time came for Laozi to write what became the Tao Te Ching, he did not just talk about Tao principles, he also talked about himself, his own thoughts about the Tao. This was a departure from all the classics that he had access to. Just to give everyone a rough idea what I mean by this, in Tao Te Ching 20, one of the chapters to come, he talked about how different he was from most people. He talked about how most people were excited in life, while he tended to be quiet. People had surplus, while he seemed lacking because he lived a simple life. They seemed so bright, scrutinizing, shrewd, and calculating, while Laozi himself seemed unsophisticated by comparison. So he talked about not just the Tao, but about himself to give insights. It is also why in chapter 67, he talked about his 3 treasures. They formed the basis for his approach to life. So he wanted to explain that. So then here's the final recap. We ended up on this slide in our discussion last time. In this slide, Laozi spoke of how he learned from the ancients without anything from them providing deeper insights. The next best thing he could do was to observe and deduce. By seeing how the ancient masters approached life and how they interacted with people, one can get a pretty good idea how they thought about the Tao. That is the basic concept. So Laozi ended up with a total of 3 characteristics, and we will be going over them one by one. Before we do that, I want to follow up on my comment about how the reverence that Laozi expressed in the Tao Te Ching about the sages and high-level cultivators who were ancient to him. Where in the Tao Te Ching can we see some examples of that? Well, it turns out there are quite a few examples. I'll just pick 3 to share with everybody. So this slide is called Laozi and the Ancients. Laozi had tremendous respect for the Tao sages and cultivators who came before him. They were his predecessors. This respect was reflected in his words when he wrote the Tao Te Ching, as I mentioned, which was a summary, his summary of the Tao principles that he had learned from all the scrolls of the classics. And his summary, the Tao Te Ching, of course, has been studied by subsequent generations ever since. And point in fact, when we talk about the ancients, the previous chapter 14, that is the first mention of the ancients in all of Tao Te Ching. That's where he talked about wielding the ancient Tao to manage present-day life. And here are some more examples about the ancients. Tao Te Ching 22. In this chapter, Laozi quotes the ancients, indicating he viewed them as the authority on the Tao. In this case, he spoke of what the ancients taught about being non-contentious. In other words, harmony, a recurring theme in the Tao Te Ching. Then we have another example in Tao Te Ching 62. In this chapter, Laozi says the ancients value the Tao above everything in the material world. As of the things in the material world, it didn't matter what it was. It could be the most valuable treasure or the most opulent spectacle. None of it could compare to the Tao. This was true of the ancients. It was true of Laozi. As I study the Tao more and more, I find that it is also becoming very true for myself. Then, lastly, as our final example out of quite a few more, we have Tao Te Ching 68. In this chapter, Laozi points out that harmony is the ultimate principle of the ancients. So with the above in mind, let us return to the line-by-line discussion for the chapter, starting at line 6. Line 6 says, hesitant like crossing a wintry river. First, let me break the characters down one by one. we have 6 characters here. The first character means hesitant, and the second character there is a pause. You'll see that the second bracket that I have in this line says comma. That's how it's translated. In English, when we want to pause, we use a comma. And the third character that you see there is like or similar to. Not like, do you like or enjoy something, but like as in similarity. Then, in the fourth character, that's a simple one. It simply means winter. And let me say that one of the misconceptions is that all Chinese characters have many or at least multiple definitions. The reality is it's no different from English. In English, some words have only 1 or 2 definitions, while other words have numerous possible definitions. It is the same in Chinese. Therefore, some characters can only be translated in one way or perhaps 2 different ways. While other characters, you really have to be familiar with the context to figure out the exact meaning, just like English. So this character is winter. Then we have a character for step, as in stepping across. And finally, last character is the one for river. And when you string all of this together, you get hesitant, like winter crossing river. And translated, you've got hesitant, like crossing a wintry river. So the translation sticks closely to the literal transcription. The idea is a poetic image. The poetic imagery is about this visual of somebody making slow, careful progress across a frozen river in wintertime. Now, there are many implications of that. The very word hesitant means appropriately cautious, watching where you are going, being sure of your next step before you take it. So this is all about the importance of knowing where you are going and looking before you take that step. In order to do that, you must be perceptive. You must be aware of possible danger. And being perceptive, seeing clearly in front of you before taking that, committing to take that step, putting weight on it. And that is the next point here. You have to be sure that you have solid footing. You have to make sure you have stability before you take the next step. Now, keep in mind, all of this is not literal. This is not literally about here's how you cross a river that has been frozen over in wintertime. This is about, again, how the ancient masters lived their lives. When they walked their life journey, it was as if somebody is crossing that river, watching every step. So in other words, this means ancient masters were never rash. They were never reckless. They took their time to do things right before deciding on what's next. That's important. This all depicts the ancient masters as possessing what we would call mindful awareness. So let's delve into walking across frozen river. What must you do? I talked about being perceptive. There are 2 parts to that. To be perceptive means, number one, you have to look. You have to watch for areas of thin ice. Those are the areas that can break open, plunging you into the icy cold water. And from experience, people know that when ice forms on the surface of a river, it would not necessarily be even. Therefore, an area may have thicker ice right next to an area with thin ice. The other perception is hearing. That is to say, you have to listen carefully, be on high alert with every step to listen for the cracks, the sound of cracks that signal danger. If you do hear the ice cracking, it's time to back away to a place that you know is solid. Then, even with all of your perceptions on high alert, you still have to be careful. You have to test your footing before shifting weight, putting weight on it. You have to maintain your balance because of the ever-present danger of slipping. You can fall hard on ice and break through. And even worse, if there is a strong current under the ice, it can pull you right under. It is even more dangerous. You can be carried far away from the opening that you inadvertently created before you can even react. Then there's certain death. Lastly, you always want to keep distance in mind. What do I mean by that? You want to know where you are. How far have you gone into the frozen river? Are you at the halfway point or not quite there? Could the ice perhaps be thinner in the middle of the frozen river than closer to the banks? How far are you from the other bank of the river? You must be aware of the distance. This is all referencing life. When we talk about this, it is easy to see what Laozi was getting at. He was really referring to becoming aware of where you are in your life journey. Where have you come from? What have you seen or experienced? Where are you now in your life journey? And where are you going? So the ancient masters were like that in their everyday conduct. That is, they always proceeded with a solid grasp on the current situation that is analogous to having solid footing. This is so much a part of Chinese culture that there is a popular saying, 脚踏实地. It is similar to how we, in English, would say, keep your feet on the ground. So this is a common saying in Mandarin. Translated, it means foot stepping on solid ground. So the first character literally is foot or leg. The second character is to step on, a verb. The third character is solid, and the last character is ground. So we can do a literal translation. In life, this is also metaphoric. It's talking about having a sensible and practical approach. It is talking about having certainty in every step of the process. So this is an idiomatic expression. It's to act in a practical way. It is to keep your eyes on the basics. It is so important in the journey of life that I began my book, The Tao of Joy Every Day, day one with this very concept, 脚踏实地, foot stepping on solid ground. And that is in reference to the journey of 1,000 miles. Day one of the Tao of joy every day. It has more details. It talks about the importance of starting that journey, but also the importance of every step along the way. So altogether, this is that line hesitant, like crossing a wintry river. Now we can go to the second characteristic of the ancient masters, which is line 7. Line 7 says, cautious, like fearing for neighbors. So before we get into the meaning of that, let me break the characters down one by one. We have 6 characters here. The first character is cautious. It is specifically about being cautious like an animal. So the visual is that of a monkey who is looking all around, being very cautious before making a move. And at the sound of any alarm is ready to bolt. So that cautiousness is evoked. This is followed by the same character, which is not translated as a word, but as a comma, because it is a character that depicts a pause. Sometimes it can be used to signal a verbalization like oh or ah. So here it's a pause, and then we have the same character as before in the third position, like, similar to. In the fourth position, we have the character for fear. Then we have the character for, another one of those characters that can be translated only one way. Then the final character is neighbor or neighbors, plural or singular, depending on the context. In this case, it has to be plural because we're talking about the 4 neighbors. Why 4 neighbors? 4 neighbors means all directions. North, south, east, and west. It's about behaving as if you are being watched from all directions all the time. That is, no matter where you are. So the overall expression is talking about being cautious of doing something wrong because your actions may be seen by neighbors all around you. But let me note that this does not mean the ancient masters lived in fear. Far from it. This is simply a way to describe how they lived conscientiously. The appearance of a Tao master's action may be similar to someone who's constantly being watched, but no actual fear. The only thing that is constantly monitoring the Tao masters would be conscience, plus discipline to practice always follow the Tao. So these ancient masters, ancient Tao cultivators, were always bound by conscience. They always want to do what is right. Taking a cue from this, Tao cultivators, past and certainly today, all develop their own sense of right and wrong that they will adhere to. Now, specific approach may differ by individual. Some may believe that they are watched by deities all the time. For instance, there are expressions about how heaven will bear witness on all of your actions. Or some will talk about the heavenly net. It is loose but misses nothing. And that's a equivalent to the concept of karma. So some believe they're watched by deities up in heaven. Some may live by their own code of honor and use that to determine their actions. And what is a code of honor? But basically, conscience that has been formalized and codified. So the net effect is the same. Even when there's no one around, your conscience is present. Regardless of the setting, the changes around you, your circumstance, your conscience should remain constant, unchanged. So what this means is that the ancients were always practicing virtues. They were always being virtuous, publicly or privately. They exercise discipline over themselves. They want to be always virtuous at all times, as if they're being watched. Now, I want to note that many people are quite the opposite. People don't necessarily do what is being described here. Let me go to the next slide and show you what I mean by that. So this slide is called conscientious. I want to first talk about how people are. So my observation, and perhaps yours too, is that people may act differently according to the situation. If they are watched, if they are seen by others, they may be on their best behavior because they want that to be the perception, to be the public perception. But then they may be quite different in private or when they think no one is watching. Overall, it is as if they have a mask that they can put on or take off. They reveal their true character, the real face, taken off the mask, only if they're not being monitored. So behavior for many people can be situational, and perhaps that is true for us as well. I definitely remember being that way before I studied the Tao. It is something that I know I had to work on. So Tao cultivators live according to a different standard. Tao cultivators wish to be virtuous in a consistent way in all aspects of life, no matter what that is. They follow their conscience even when there are no eyes on them, and even further than that, even when it is inconvenient or more difficult for them to follow their conscience than not. So there is a story from my book, The Tao of Wisdom, called The Moon is Watching, which is talking about this. It's basically a metaphor about the moon serving metaphorically for conscience. So the moon is watching really breaks down to your conscience is watching you. The conscience, just like the moon, think about how at nighttime, the moon illuminates the road for people who have to travel at night by moonlight. In a similar way, the conscience illuminates the right path for those who are going through a time of spiritual darkness in their life journey. So the story illustrates that and go into this idea about being guided or illuminated by conscience. Overall, it is consistent with this second characteristic, cautious like fearing for neighbors. Now we'll get into the third characteristic of the ancient Tao masters. This line says solemn, like a guest, and that's because the first character is That's what it means. Solemn, specifically, it means taking matters seriously in the context of this chapter. And the image, the poetic imagery, is that of a dignified guest on an important visit. So regardless, I want to mention that the very last character here, that character is visage or appearance or face. There is a variant, a version of the Tao Te Ching where the last character is the character for guest. But even when the character is not guest, ancient commentary is consistent in explaining that this is the dignified demeanor of an honored guest, the dignified, regal appearance of the honored guest, not someone who's constantly joking around in a flippant or frivolous way. That person may end up acting inappropriately in a setting that calls for formality. Tao cultivators had a respect for life and the life journey, and therefore they treated with seriousness, with serious intent. Tao cultivators, therefore, always follow the etiquette appropriate to the situation, no matter what that situation may be. This is something that applies even with friends and family. The ancient masters, as a good example, they were always courteous in their social interactions, even with those who are close to you. With friends and family, one should still be aware of personal boundaries and make the appropriate adjustments. The ancient masters approach life with the same serious intent. And overall, what we have done is that we're building this image of ancient sages who lived life deliberately. That is, they had a deliberate purpose in their approach to life. Next line, this is line 9, and we're now at the 4th characteristic of the ancient masters. This line says, loose, like ice about to melt. So the ancient masters were loose. Well, what the character means is that the ancients were loose and relaxed rather than dogmatic or stubborn. That's the real meaning of it. And the poetic imagery is about the warmth of spring, that the warm winds, the temperature, they begin to melt the ice that's accumulated in wintertime. So the ice is breaking up, falling to the ground, dissolving into water, flowing away. So that is the looseness of the melted ice. And let me say, this is not completely unknown in Western culture. We too often talk about breaking the ice in a social context. That's what this line really is. Not about actual temperature, but about the social environment. It's about personal warmth. In addition to being courteous, it is a personal warmth that can be disarming to even people who are the most defensive. Tao sages have a sense of humor. They can be humorous without being frivolous or flippant. They can be hilarious without needing to clown around. They were easygoing. They're not worried about life. They're not anxious. They don't suffer from anxiety attacks. They let bygones be bygones, feeling no need to dwell on the past. This is something that we can learn from and emulate. when others make mistakes, we can be more understanding and cut them some slack. This is all based on the realization of humility. That is, our understanding, our realization is that all of us, we're all human beings. None of us is perfect. We all make mistakes from time to time. So it may not be that big of a deal when others have made a mistake. We can approach them with a relaxed warmth in forgiving and letting go of the past. Line 10. Line 10 says, genuine, like plain wood. The key character here is the very last character that you see, pu. This character is the pu principle. It means a plain piece of wood. It is the Tao symbol of simplicity. So, very important character. In the past, in the study of the Tao in the West, pu has been a little bit distorted, translated as uncarved block. And a couple of comments about that. First of all, why is there an apostrophe between P and U? That is using the older romanization system, not the new pinyin system. In the new system, the apostrophe is not used. In the old system, it is used to signify the aspirated sound. It means pu. Without it, it would be bu. So pu is mistranslated as the uncarved block. Now, note that the uncarved block of wood has already been cut into a block, so it can be carved. Pu is not that. Pu means simply a plain piece of wood, something you may find in the forest that has only been shaped by nature, not by humans. So this is the pu principle. What is it about? First, pu, that piece of wood, symbolizes our original, simplest, and most natural state. Because it hasn't been worked on. A newborn baby is at maximum pu. It is also the point of unlimited possibility and utmost potential. This is why when people see an infant, they feel such a sense of joy and wonder. It's the miracle of life. And in this newborn infant, they see possibilities. There's literally no limitation on what this child can become in time. Now, as this little human being grows up, there will be influences, there will be experiences in the material world that will shape the developing child. That is like the wood starting to be worked on with tools, starting to be shaped into something. Is it a container, like a wooden cup? Is it a plate? Is it a work of art, like a figurine? With every cut, every task that's being applied to the piece of wood, it becomes more specific. It becomes less and less possible to change direction, to make it into something else. So the possibilities begin to dwindle. The potential become more confined to a specific thing. What does increase as it is being worked on is functionality and usefulness. So this is a commentary not just about a piece of wood, but about you and me, about all human beings. Applying Pu to the ancient masters, they were always following the principle of simplicity. This meant they were down to earth, they tended to be very plain spoken, and they were very direct. Because of this, they were trusted. What they said, what they talked about, people believed. So I mentioned Emperor Fuxi from about 4,800 years ago. Even before he put together, compiled the I Ching to record all the different patterns of nature and reality that he perceived, even before that, he became adept at predicting the weather. This was all based on the patterns that he observed in the sky. So back in his days, 4,800 years ago, this was pre-agricultural times. There were people who gathered together in a hunting party. The tribal hunters would go out to hunt game. They were hunters and gatherers as opposed to farmers. Now they could be out away from the tribe for weeks at a time. Before they embarked on this hunting excursion, the hunters would always go to Fuxi to ask about the weather that's coming up. He would be very straightforward with them. He would let them know exactly what to expect. Therefore, they would know what preparations to make. And overall, his predictions of the weather will be simple, stick to the basics, following the principle of Pu, and therefore they will follow his recommendations exactly. Similar to that, Tao cultivators and sages prefer to keep it simple, tell it like it is. For you and I today, emulating this simplicity, we find that there's no need to beat around the bush. It would be better to come right to the point. This too can make all of us more genuine, more authentic, and therefore more trustworthy. When somebody has authenticity, you don't need to second guess that person or try to figure out some kind of hidden meaning. Much easier, much more comfortable, much more relaxed. If one were to lose this simplicity, the result is not just greater complexity, but duplicity as well. That is, lack of trust. That people tend to hide details within complexity, be less than direct and plain spoken. Now, those of you who have followed this talk for some time, I think you can tell this is exactly why I explain the Tao the way that I do. I keep this principle in mind. I want to hold on to it in providing the clearest, most accurate, indeed the most basic explanations about the Tao. Why? Because that is exactly what is in keeping with the Tao. So you guys know what I do is not what some may consider high literature or scholarly or academic. Some people do want and prefer that, and more power to them. For me, though, it is much more important to provide the Tao that everybody can use in daily life. And when I say everybody, I'm including younger people, kids. To accomplish this goal, there's less of a need for me to delve into references of published works from scholars or historical documents with all the details that implies. My goal in the Tao, just like the ancient masters, is to keep it simple according to the Pu principle. Next line. We're now on line 11. It says, open like a valley. Here again, the key character is the last one, which is gu. It means valley, which is a recurring image in the Tao. The valley represents openness, acceptance, and accommodation to everyone. It is about being able to tolerate differences, different people, different opinions, different backgrounds, different perspectives. The wide open vistas of the valley symbolize someone who is big of heart and therefore unaffected by criticisms or praise. The valley has room enough for all different perspectives and opinions, good or bad, for or against. Indeed, we draw strength from a diversity of opinions. The second thing that the valley represents is nurture. The valley provides shielding and protection from nature. The valley can provide this safe place, this cocoon, this nurturing location that can sustain the myriad things. So this protective, sustaining nature of the valley is the nurture of the valley. The ancient masters embraced and benefited all. That is because they are like the valley. They accommodated everybody, and what they did of a beneficial nature, they applied that to everyone. Everybody was the same. Everybody was equal. And they also note that the empty space of the valley, just like the empty space of a container, is what gives it its goodness. Next line, line 12. Line 12 says, opaque like muddy water. So just like the previous two lines, here the key character is the last one, 浊. It means muddy water. It has layers of meaning in the Tao. First, the opacity of muddy water means one cannot see through it. This is simply another way to say depths that cannot be discerned. This is from line 3, earlier in this chapter. You cannot see through muddy water, meaning the sages cannot be understood. In the line 3 expression, it just says that they are deep and you cannot see through to the depths. It's the same idea that there's so much to learn from these ancient masters. It is not something that is so shallow and transparent that you can see it all in one glance. The second meaning of 浊 is about water mixing with dirt or dust, metaphoric for mixing, the sage mixing with people, becoming integrated as part of the community. Sages throughout history have been there for everyone, helping people, but then just because the sages were spending time with normal, non-Tao-centric people every day, it did not mean that the sages became like everybody. The sages held the same high standard within themselves. They helped people, but they maintained that same internal standard. Number 3, being humble while also being of service. Just because the sages were helping people out, it did not make them arrogant, feeling like they were above it all. Muddiness here means having no need to display one's own brilliance. So you can see 3 layers of meaning in just that one character, muddy water. So this is the final characteristic. We are now doing a mini summary starting with the first 2 points. So the first one is mindful awareness. This is just another way to describe being like someone walking across a frozen river. You must be aware, you must be mindful of every step that you take. So here's the quick summary for that. Like someone walking across a frozen river, the ancient masters lived mindfully with careful steps. The ancient masters, the masters of antiquity, they knew where they were in life and where they were going. And this awareness kept them on solid ground. So I mentioned that we started with hesitance as a description, meaning a careful approach to life. This applies equally to you and me, not just to Laozi. When you're about to cross a wide frozen river, it is especially important to have a sense of how far you have left one shore and how much more to go. And as I mentioned a few slides ago, this is analogous to knowing where you are in your life journey. Where have you come from in this journey of yours? And where are you going? Number 2, conscientious, like being watched by 4 neighbors. And this is about behaving as if you are being monitored, even though you may not be. So the ancient masters were consistent in words and action. That is, whatever they preached, they also practiced. And they did so regardless of setting or circumstance. They were trusted by everyone because of it. They had this absolute integrity that people trusted. And this is all about your own conscience as well. It is literally true that your conscience is always watching you. Let us continue with this mini summary for the next 2 characteristics. Number 3, dignified. This one is about having a solemn and serious attitude, like being a guest of honor for an important visit. The ancient masters understood the importance of social protocols, so they were always polite and composed. In Mandarin, the word for polite or politeness is 客气. 2 characters. The first one is guest. The second one is energy. So guest energy is politeness. This is definitely something that one will notice when visiting a Tao temple. People who study the Tao keep this in mind, so everybody observes propriety and etiquette. They're unfailingly courteous at all times. Number 4, personal warmth, like winter ice melted by the warmth of spring. The ancient masters were naturally caring and considerate. As individuals, they had this warmth. They seemed like the warm winds of spring to the people they come across. So this warmth could set even the most wary individuals at ease. So the imagery is about ice being melted, loosening up, breaking into pieces, flowing as water. And this was something that the ancients observed in every spring season. Now we can wrap up the mini summary with the last 3 characteristics. Number 5, genuine simplicity, like a plain piece of wood from the forest. The ancient masters prefer simplicity in all aspects of life. Out of that simplicity, they advocated doing just enough and no more, to keep it simple. So this is the character pu, the pu principle, the plain piece of wood applied to life. Number 6, openness, like a valley that accommodates all. So several aspects about the valley. The valley is open. Like the open valley, the ancient masters welcomed all. Oftentimes, these ancient sages were sage rulers and therefore responsible for a large group of people, like the subjects of a kingdom. Next, the nurturing side. Like the fertile valley, the ancient masters were nurturing to all. They wanted people to grow, develop, and advance, not just themselves. The openness of the valley meant that the ancient masters benefited from diverse perspectives, different opinions that reveal yet another way or perhaps another solution to solve a particular problem. The nurturing nature of the ancient masters meant whatever knowledge or wisdom they develop, they would share freely with everyone. Lastly, I just want to remind everyone, in a previous chapter, we covered the valley spirit, which was also an important concept in the Tao. If you missed that coverage, it has been recorded in our YouTube channel. Number 7, be with people, like muddy water that one cannot see through. So remember, the muddiness of the water has a bunch of different layers of meaning. The ancient masters, they mixed with people to provide assistance. Muddiness is opaque. The ancient masters were opaque, but internally they had clarity. So this is one of the ways that we know that the hermit is only a stereotype about Tao sages. Real Tao sages from history were of the community, part of the community, within the community. They did not live far away from people because people would disrupt their peace. Far from it, they could be at peace while in the middle of a bustling, busy community. They played a central role to provide help and advice. They were engaged with everyday living, involved with all the daily activities, just like everybody else. This is what it means to mix, to become muddy. Now, as I mentioned, despite being in that role to dispense advice, the ancient masters remained humble. And now we can bring all 7 characteristics together to summarize them in one slide. Now, of course, when we do that, we're going to be losing some details, but it's good for us to have the overview for all 7. We start out with mindful awareness. And now I think everybody can keep in mind easily this whole visual of somebody crossing a bridge, not a bridge, a river that has been frozen over. And the reason why ancient masters and Lao Tzu himself all leaned heavily on visual imagery is because it is a very easy way for us to recall these Tao concepts. Number 2, conscientious, like being watched by 4 neighbors, so behaving as if you are being watched even when you are not. So in that way, you can be consistent and true to your own virtues. Number 3, dignified. This is about 客气. This is about guest energy, the politeness, the courtesy, being a guest at an important visit. This is all about being formal, following protocol, having that social graces. Number 4, personal warmth, like winter ice melted by the warmth of spring. So Tao cultivators, Tao sages are not cold-hearted or cold by nature or demeanor. They're friendly, they're approachable, they're warm. Number 5, genuine simplicity, plain piece of wood from the forest. You never have to second guess the sage. A real sage is not cryptic like the stereotype, speaking puzzles or riddles. Then you have to figure it out. A real sage will simply tell it like it is. Number 6, openness, the valley, the recurring image, accommodating everybody, nurturing the myriad things. And finally, number 7, muddy water, be with the people like muddy water that one cannot see through. The muddiness means there's a lot more to you that people cannot readily discern. So here we have all 7 characteristics of the ancient masters in one slide. When we put it together like this, there is something interesting that we can also see a pattern. Here's what it looks like. First, I draw a line bisecting the slide, top to bottom. So there's a top half and there's a bottom half. On the top half, there's mindful awareness, being conscientious, there's genuine simplicity and openness. What do all of these have in common? These are all speaking to the approach to life. This is talking about how the Tao masters of antiquity approach life. They lived with mindful awareness. They followed their conscience to do the right thing. They lived the simple life with an attitude of openness to all. This is how they lived. And I would suggest for you and me, this is how we should live the top half. What about the bottom half? There's dignified personal warmth, being with people. The bottom half is all about interactions with people. it's the second major category that pull together 3 out of the 7 characteristics. The ancient masters treated people with respect and courtesy. They set people at ease with their warmth and kindness, coming out of a place of compassion. They remain humble while being involved in the community, helping people but not placing them above the people. So this is another way to look at the 7 characteristics of the ancient masters, with a division of 2 major categories. Now we can continue on to talk about the implications of the 7 characteristics. This takes us to line 13. Line 13 says, "Who can be muddled yet desist?" So let's return to the muddy water for just a moment. Starting with water, we have seen multiple examples of water representing the Tao. The other metaphor that may be less familiar is dust representing the material world. This is similar to how in the West we say dust to dust. The material world is described as dust because it is full of dust. Therefore, we become muddy through our material existence. I talked about the newborn infant being at the utmost point of the Pu principle. As we grow, we are shaped by the environment. We interact with other people in the material world, therefore become muddy through interactions with dust. That muddiness, the muddy water, has to be still in order to settle down, in order to become clear. Therefore, what this implies for the ancients, Tao masters understand the importance of settling down, taking a pause. Now, I want to say that this is true for the ancients before the time of Laozi. It's definitely true for Laozi himself and all of his contemporary sages. It is certainly true for all of us. We would also be wise to slow down and stop every now and then. And there's more implications of muddy water that continues to line 14. Line 14 says, "In stillness, gradually become clear." This is framed as a question. We know the clearer water becomes, the more easily one can see through it. So the more clarity you have, the more still and settled the water becomes. So the ancients drew this connection between stillness and clarity. We need stillness, Jing, in order to regain clarity, Qing. This is actually a central concept in the Tao. Jing, the first character that you see in this line, in addition to stillness, it means tranquility, quietness, silence. It is the state where your mind is free of noise, externally and internally. It is the state where your spirit can connect powerfully with the Tao, drawing inspiration and creative energy. The second character that you see in this line, the one toward the end, Qing, that is the character for clarity, specifically mental and or spiritual clarity. It means being able to see everything better. And when I say better, I'm not talking about vision, sight, eyesight. I'm talking about being able to see, being able to understand, perceive, discern in terms of your life journey. To be able to see all aspects of your life with clarity is a gift. It is a blessing. Once you have that level of clarity, you never want to be without it. So as I said, Ching and Jing, these are central concepts in the Tao. There is a classic specifically devoted to that, the Qing Jing Jing. It was written in the Tang Dynasty roughly 1200 years ago. And for those who are interested, I do have translations and explanations in the Tao of Tranquility. Let's move on to the next line. Who can be serene yet persist? I want to single out the last character there, 久. It means persistence is required. The character itself means long, as in long-lasting duration, 久. Because it is a long-lasting duration, persistence is absolutely required. The process takes time. The bottom line is that we have no overnight transformation from ignorance to enlightenment. The only path is sustained practice in serenity, which can be reflection or meditation. There are no shortcuts. Now, I know people are familiar or have seen the concept of meditation. Let me speak on reflection for a moment. Reflection in the Tao context is a rigorous review of one's own actions and expressions on a daily basis. The purpose is to see if one has strayed from the Tao. So both meditation and reflection, these are the path that the ancient masters knew quite well. They practiced it, and this is the reason why Lao Tzu wanted to bring it up, is to encourage that we can benefit from the same practice. It is a spiritual refinement that, as I said, takes time. It will unfold gradually over years. So that is line 15. We are now getting close to the top of the hour, so we need to jump to the summary. The first part of the summary we have already seen before. It's about the introduction to the ancient masters. We talked about how the ancient masters attained subtle wonders. I brought up the classics that we still have today. Of all the classics that we still have, like the I Ching and traditional Chinese medicine classics, there were many more that were lost to history. Lao Tzu knew about these lost wisdom from history and marveled at the subtle wonders. At the same time, Lao Tzu also noted that these ancient masters had such great depth that one could not easily see how they became who they were. Thus, the only way to learn from the ancient masters was through careful observation, and then Lao Tzu provided 7 characteristics as we discussed. That is the summary for today. The first characteristic was being mindful awareness, taking every step with care. Then, being conscientious, that is to say, always following your conscience. When I say this is as if you are being watched at all times, literally it is true, your conscience is watching you at all times. Then, courteous, being serious, being respectful, always aware of propriety in a social setting. Number 4, being warm and relaxed. This is about personal demeanor, and this is like melting ice, able to put people at ease. Number 5, to be simple. This is the Pu principle, the principle of simplicity. Number 6 is open and accepting, like the valley. And this is being kind and nurturing to all. Number 7, lastly, involved and engaged, to be active in the community. And this is where I want to encourage everyone that we do have an online community at Facebook, and I would encourage everyone to participate, to get involved, to be engaged. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.